Welcome to VCE Biology and the first of my little vlogs for my YouTube channel, just for you guys. So we're going to start with a little unit on cell theory, looking at some really significant components of biology that you will study over the next 2.5 years if you continue with VCE. So with no further ado, let's get on with it. Oops, that's not going to work. Why didn't that work? So the cell theory is sort of given to these three guys, but it's well known that they worked with a lot of other scientists and used the work of a lot of other scientists to the point, in fact, this guy in the middle here, Virchow, is well known for having stolen his students' work. So we should probably remember his students, but no one ever remembers his name. Anyway, so these guys, Theodor Schwann, Matthias Schleiden and Rudolf Virchow, are recognised as the people who put forward these main points that make the cell theory as we know it. And it sort of sounds a bit strange. All living things, which we call organisms, are composed of cells. All new cells come from pre-existing cells. Cells are the basic functional unit of living organisms, and the cell is the smallest living organisational unit of an organism. These days, we sort of take that for granted. That's sort of, yeah, sure. What's so fascinating about that? But until the work was done during the 1800s and compiled and put together by these three in particular, that wasn't the understanding. People really didn't understand where life came from and how we grew and maintained ourselves. So it's in sort of geological time, it's very recent. Even in human history, it's pretty recent. This is a fairly new and significant thing. And biology tends to still be very much cell-based, and of course we're looking now at a lot of medical stuff based on the cell and the cell's place in the whole process. But we will, rather than labour points that will come across the next 2.5 years, we'll keep going. So, you'll be aware of classification systems, and we divide things into kingdoms. But before we divide into kingdoms, we divide all living organisms, all living things, into two groups based on their cells. And we have prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. And the prokaryotic cells are basically the bacteria, so one of the kingdoms. And they've been around a really long time. These are the first life forms which put together the ability to self-replicate. So as you can see there, they have this DNA, this nucleic acid, in their cytoplasm, which allows them to copy the DNA, to function as an organism, and to make copies of themselves. So this is a really important step in evolutionary life on the planet. So, what do we know about prokaryotes? Well, they can be autotrophic, that means make their own energy, like plants, or heterotrophic, like ourselves, and have to consume things. Those ones that might be making me sick at the moment, well, I think it might be a virus, are heterotrophic. They're using me as a host to find food. They are single-celled. We look at one-cell organisms, but they grow in colonies that are huge. They lack a membrane-bound nucleus, so as you can see here, all the interior of the cell is just a blob of chemicals, including the material we'd find inside our nucleus, the DNA, just free-floating. They're only small, between 0.5 and 10 micrometers, which, you know, is pretty small. We can see them under a microscope, but not easily. DNA is obviously well, not obviously from this diagram at all, but actually that's one big circular piece of DNA. That's all jumbled around itself. And their cell walls, so they have a cell wall on the outside here, and it contains an interesting chemical called peptidoglycan, which means it's got peptides, protein bases, and glycogen, or glucose base as well. So there's a protein carbohydrate mixture there in the cell wall for the chemists in the room. The eukaryote cell is quite different, and these are cells that your body is made of. Theoretically, your red blood cells are prokaryotic because they have no nucleus. They do have membrane-bound organelles, so it's always a bit of a moot point, really. But the living things, all other living things, are either plant, animal, fungus, or protists, and they all have eukaryotic cells. So the difference here is that cells have a membrane-bound nucleus, so So there's our DNA, all nicely squished in there, and in fact, in linear pieces, so lots of chromosomes, which we'll talk about later, inside a nucleus of its own. So not free-floating like the bacteria. Cells are much larger, so looking at 30 to 150 micrometers. So we can see those on microscopes, and we will be looking at those soon. And their organelles are also membrane-bound, and they're the features that really make them stand out. And then, of course, with such a large group of organisms, there's a lot of variety between what goes on. So, what do we see? Well, plants, pretty common cells for us to notice. We eat lots of plant material, we grow plants, we're surrounded by plants. Their cells have specialised jobs to do, as ours do. They have cell walls, but their cell walls are carbohydrate only. They're made of cellulose, a particular carbohydrate they make. They're autotrophic, so they're using the sun's energy to combine carbon dioxide and oxygen in the process we call photosynthesis to create glucose, or actually it's actually a G3P, which is two G3Ps make a glucose, and the glucose is then used to make things like cellulose and starch and all sorts of other mono, di and polysaccharides. And that happens in a chloroplast. So the other thing we see is large vacuole, stores material, but also creates an internal skeleton for the cell by putting pressure back out on the walls to give the cell shape. We'll talk about that as we go along through the year as well. Animal cells, like ourselves, again, our cells have very specialised roles. We'll talk more about that. There's no cell wall. There's quite a difference there. And in this case, they're heterotrophic. They actually need to consume other organisms to obtain energy. Animal cells also tend to be smaller than plant cells. And that's partly because we have specialised cells to make skeletons and things. Plants use the cell wall and that large vacuole to create an internal skeleton of sorts. The fungus, so this is one sort of fungus, a yeast cell. Here we're looking, they're a bit of a blend in some ways. They're plant-like, but they don't have a wall. Or their wall's not wallish, plant cell wallish, but it has a wall with chitin, different material. They don't have chloroplasts, so they have to be heterotrophic. They have to eat other things. And some are single-celled, some are multi-celled. There's quite a bit of variety in the fungus group. Then we have the protists. And these are, again, single-celled organisms, but will be like bacteria live in quite large colonies. Some are autotrophic and therefore are photosynthetic. And you see this one here, this paramecium, has lots of little green chloroplast-like structures. So it's able to do some photosynthesis for itself. Some indeed are heterotrophic and get their food by helping to break down other animal products. And they lack cell walls, so they're more like an animal cell in the fact that they can change shape and bend and move around things. So, living things, organisms, have a lot of things in common. We call those the requirements of life. And if you aren't able to do this, then you're considered non-living. And there's one major group we consider non-living, which always confuses people, which I'll get to in a minute. So the requirements of life, things that organisms need to sustain life. So generally we include movement in that. Now, think about plants, they don't really move too far if they're staying in the ground, but they sway. And so you don't have to have all of these things. So plants don't have physical movement. We must respire. We need to be able to exchange gases. So in the case of ourselves, we breathe in oxygen, breathe out carbon dioxide. Plants, of course, do both. They move oxygen and carbon dioxide in both directions because they use both gases for different things. You need to be able to grow and reproduce. You need to be able to extract nutrition in some form, so you're either heterotrophic like ourselves or autotrophic like plants. You need to be able to get rid of your waste by excretion, and you need that ability to sense and respond to the environment, both your internal environment, so the environment of your cells, so the intracellular environment of the cell, and the intercellular environment of the organism, and obviously the external environment. So these are things we consider important for living creatures. So viruses cause a lot of problems for all of us. I think I've got a virus at the moment. Had some nasty fevers the last couple of days, so it could well be. They can't do most of the things that we expect living things to be able to do. They're not cellular in the way we understand cells to exist. they're very small. We're talking 20 to 30 nanometers now. So we're talking very small, almost, atomic size, bigger than atoms, but almost atomic size. There's no cytoplasm, there's no organelles, there's no chromosome. They either have RNA, and we call those retroviruses, or they have DNA, but they don't have both. And as you'll learn later in the course, you need both to be able to self-replicate and to be able to decode your DNA to create proteins. They're enclosed in a protein coat, but they also require a host. They need the host for their metabolism, and they need the host for reproduction. So therefore, they're actually a parasite in that sense, but they're not living. So, cell theory and our groups of cells, and that's our starting point. I'll see you in the next video.